Hi and welcome to lesson 4 of our population topic. Today we're going to be looking at a new word, which is something called urbanisation. We're going to look at China again, and we're going to look at how this new term fits in with our wider population unit. As usual, your activity is to watch this video. There will be opportunities for you to pause it while I ask you to complete some small tasks, and at the end there are 3 review questions. I'd like you to upload your answers to those 3 review questions onto Satchel 1 once you finish with this video. As always, you are able to pause, rewind, or do whatever you want with these videos to help you out when you're answering them questions, but also any questions, please do ask for some support from either me or your teacher. So, a bit of a starter question here, and that is, in the world, do you think most people live in urban areas, that's towns and cities, or rural areas, that's the countryside? So, just have a pause of the video and see what you would think. Imagine this is a class scenario. Okay. We're going to come back to the answer to this question a bit later in the lesson. But my first thought is most people live in urban areas, because if you're in a city, we know that means there's lots of people together. It means there's a very high population density. Whereas when we think of the rural areas, we often think of the small farms in the countryside, etc. Now, before we kind of go into the actual realities of this, we need to look at 2 key terms here. The first one is rural, and that's a word used to describe countryside or an area lacking dense settlement. So if you link back to a couple of lessons ago, that dense settlement is all talking about how closely squished together those people are. So in the countryside, they might have settlements, so people still live there, but they're not very dense, they're not a city. Whereas an urban area is very, very dense, it's built up, it's got dense infrastructure, which is road networks, power cables, phone lines, etc. So the urban areas are our cities, the rural areas are our inverted commas countryside. So there are 6 images on your screen now. I'd like to pause this video, and for each one I would like you to tell me whether you would think they were urban or rural areas. So pause the video 1 to 6 and have a go. Okay. I would hopefully go with the following. For number 1, I would definitely say that's an urban area. And number 2, I would definitely say it's a rural area. I can tell that because of the population density in each of the photographs. Number 3 is London. That's an urban area. Now the bottom 3 are a little bit more challenging because they are a little bit ambiguous, especially number 4 and number 6. So number 4, I would personally go for a rural area. Now, you might disagree with me, and if you did disagree with me, said urban, and you can explain why, that is absolutely fine. I'm going rural because even though there is a small settlement here, it's nowhere near as densely populated or as built up as these 2 images here. For number 5, however, even though this bit here is green space, it looks to me like this is more of a city, so I'd go for urban. So a city having green space doesn't mean it's not urban, it's referring to the whole area. And the last one, again, I'd probably refer to as a rural region, mainly because it looks very, very small. There's not a huge amount of built up area, and you can see a lot of countryside behind it as well. So, I told you at the start we're looking at something called urbanisation. And this is what it means. Urbanisation is an increase in the proportion of people living in urban areas compared to rural areas. So essentially, urbanisation is the increase in number of people who are starting to live in these urban areas here. And to do that, they tend to move from these rural areas as well. So urbanisation, the movement of people or migration from rural to urban areas, and that the fancy term we give that is urbanisation. So this is a chloropleth map of urbanisation, And what it does is it tells you what percentage of the population is living in an urban area. So, for example, if we take Australia here, Australia has maybe 90 to 100% of its people living in urban areas. So the vast majority of Australians live in towns and cities like the ones we looked at before. However, if I go to perhaps let's go with India. The figures for India are much, much lower. If we look at the colour here on the scale, it's lower down about 35%. So that means that about 65% of Indians still live in rural areas. Now that should make sense because the country is very, very large. So there can be lots of people living elsewhere. It's just that density that makes it an issue. So the three questions: which areas have the highest percentage in urban areas? So if you can name any countries, any regions, any continents, that'd be good. Which areas have the lowest percentage in urban areas? Again, any countries, continents is good. And are there any patterns? So if you pause the video now, have a go at them, and then unpause it when you're done. Okay, so I would say that the areas with the highest percentage are North America, Canada, and USA. You can have the UK, you can have Western Europe. I'd argue as well that South America down here, so like Brazil, Argentina, also has a very high percentage in urban areas. The lowest, again, you say sort of Asia over here, so China, India, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand. They also have Central Africa over here. In fact, some parts of Africa, if we look on here, are much, much further down, about 10%. And the patterns, this links back in with development. So generally, the northern hemisphere is more densely in urban areas, and that's because they're more developed and more people live in cities. So, is urbanization equal everywhere? Well, this little map here is showing how the population living in urban areas has changed. So if we go back to 1950 in Asia, only about 300 million, this is measured in billions, only about 300 million were living in urban areas. Nowadays, or 2015 even, it's nearly 2 billion. So every continent has seen an increase in its urban population. And the one that's had the main increase are Asia and Africa, and the one that had the least increase are Europe and North America. And if we're linking this back into our China population, this is a graph of how China's urban population has changed. Now, it shows that this black line here is the percentage in urban areas, and this little blue line here is the percentage in rural areas. You'll notice that in this small part here, towards the middle of the graph, both of the lines are increasing, and that was because of China's population boom, which we've already looked at. However, the overall trend is very clearly that urbanization is happening in China, and it's happening very, very quickly. Nowadays, around the year 1980, we can see that the urban population overtook the rural population, and now the vast majority of people in China are living in those urban areas. This map goes to 2050. If we could extrapolate this line and carry it on into the year 2100, I think we would expect China's urban population to continue to increase and China's rural population to continue to decrease. So, the next little thing we're going to look at is what urbanization has caused to happen. So, because of urbanization, the world has had the creation of something that we call a mega city. Now, a mega city is a city that has 10 million people living in it. For context, the absolute largest population estimate of Liverpool, if you include the wider areas, is about 500,000 people. Okay, so a megacity, 10 million people, And this is a map of the megacities that existed in 2014. And you can notice that London is on there. You'll notice that Paris is on there. You'll notice that New York City and Los Angeles are on there as well. However, they are nowhere near the largest examples. We're looking over here. 17 of the 30 are in Asia alone. So over half of the world's megacities are in the Asian continent, and 5 of those are in China. So if we think about the UK having 1 megacity or Europe having 5, China has 5 on its own. We've got Guangzhou, which is 31.7 million people. Shanghai, which is 28.9 million. And the smallest one is Tian, which is 10.6 million people. And all of those we would expect to increase, and in the future, there's a fairly good chance that the number of megacities will increase even further. So this is Shanghai. I think this is one of my favourite city skylines. It's one of those ones that kind of shock people a little bit. So that's Shanghai in China. I think it looks really quite futuristic. But if we were going to look at Shanghai in 1987, you can see the clear difference in that city. So in this time here, this entire Bay Area is pretty much flat, whereas now it's hugely built up. And that is kind of signifying the urbanisation that has happened in China, and it's showing how much change has actually happened as well. Okay, so there are 3 questions you need to answer here. They are: outline the differences between a rural and urban area. That was told at the start of this video, so you can scroll back to that. Describe which areas of the world have experienced the highest level of urbanisation growth. Again, you can go to the maps and graphs on these slides here to really help you with that question. And then finally, describe how China's population has changed between 1950, it's meant to be 2050, sorry. And that's this graph here. So tell me how urbanisation, as urban population has changed in that time. Any questions, please do let me know. Other than that, I look forward to seeing your uploaded answers.